Right, so I want to make a video to talk a little bit about a couple different things, both having to do with the recent gun ban in Canada. Now, the first thing is something I made a video about a month ago, and it has now been confirmed that Alberta will, I don't know if it's 100%, but they're going to implement their own chief firearms officer in Alberta, which again, I just made a video about Saskatchewan and that they're going to do it. And in that, I mentioned how much I hope Alberta does the same thing, which, again, very good sign that Alberta is going along the same course. Now, what exactly that means, I've seen some slightly conflicting reports about just how much power a provincial CFO would have. But the one power that they would have is to issue licenses, which means technically, I believe they could issue prohib license, which means um, you could keep your guns. And which also, I'm not sure that if they did do that, does that mean that we could import guns that were previously prohibited, like say, AK-47, FNFAL, something like that? I'm not 100% sure about that, but we'll see. I'm sure more information will come out, but it is a very good sign. And the other thing too is that I don't know just how much power they, like I said, I don't know just how much power they have. I would hope. I mean, one of two things would be is that either the provincial government, the CFO, just flat out wouldn't enforce. I mean, they would direct the RCMP to just flat out not enforce any of the new laws, which would be one solution. Now, again, people say, oh, well, do the provincial governments have power to do that? The provincial governments don't have power to do that. I don't know 100% for sure, but the one thing I do know 100% for sure is that all of these laws and all laws in general are 100% completely arbitrary, or almost all laws are 100% arbitrary, which means there's no actual moral or ethical backing behind it, right? Like murder, yeah, there's something moral and ethically wrong about murder, but pretty much all gun laws, there's no reasoning behind it. It's just the government thinks this, therefore we're going to do this. So, uh, considering the fact that all laws are pretty arbitrary, especially the gun laws to begin with, I don't see any reason why the government can't arbitrarily say, yeah, we're not going to enforce them, because it doesn't make sense that we can arbitrarily do things in other ways, but we can't arbitrarily do it in other ways. It doesn't make any sense. If we're gonna have an inconsistent system, let's at least consistently be inconsistent. Like that's at least we're consistent with something, I guess is the best way of putting it. So that is the one thing I wanted to point out with that. It is a very good sign for Alberta and Saskatchewan. I really hope that they 100% go through with this and get it done as soon as possible, because it's something that needs to be done. And I mean, for let's hope in an ideal situation. I mean, they should do this regardless. I don't care what happens as far as federally goes. Even if, let's say, the CCFR wins the lawsuit and the OIC is thrown out, I still think stuff like this should be done, because the gun laws to begin with were far too strict. They were far too arbitrary. Uh, and appointing a provincial CFO would go very far towards scaling back the stupidity behind most of Canada's gun laws. And assuming that the OIC is kept, let's just say the CCFR or all the other organizations lose, uh, then at the very least, Alberta would have more power to not have to enforce this garbage. And it is garbage too. Like people saying that, oh well, it's realistic. Like no, it isn't. The guns on the list combined to kill like one person a year. Like the main concern was the AR-15. I've yet to see someone give a case of someone being killed with a legally owned AR-15 in Canada. I've never seen one case, not one. And I mean, there may be one, but I've yet to see it. And if there was, if the AR-15 was being used to commit crimes a lot, the government and the mainstream media would be talking about it at nauseum. It would be talked about all the time, but it isn't. Like 90% of gun crime is committed with handguns, and 90% of those are illegal. And the fact that they didn't do anything to go after handguns, which they shouldn't do to begin with, I mean, there's no reason to it. Um, a gun ban would not do anything whatsoever to to prevent crime, basically. And it's a simple cost benefit too. Like the one argument that people point out, which is still wrong, but in their minds they think it's right, and there's no changing their minds, is that, oh well, let's just say, well, 90% of guns are used in crimes. Now, I've seen the Winnipeg police chief said the number was higher. The Toronto police chief, I believe, said like 85, somewhere around that. So it's probably around 90, countrywide. Of guns used in crimes are coming from the states, which means they're illegal by default. And I mean, they're probably smuggled in. They're almost guaranteed not people who have their PAL. Even if they do, it's highly illegal already to carry around a loaded handgun, even if you are a legal gun owner. Even if you do have all the proper paperwork and all that kind of stuff, it is highly illegal. I think it's a mandatory minimum 6 months in jail. But don't quote me on it because, again, if I get something wrong, people pointed, oh, you don't know what you're talking about. But I believe that's what the case is. Um, so that's the problem when it comes to that. So um, the people say, oh, it would drop crime a little bit. Well, no, that's not the case. And the problem too is that if you did do that, it would just increase the amount of it would just increase the amount of demand for illegal guns a little bit more to fill the gap. Because the small percentage of criminals that do get their guns illegally, well, guess what they're going to do? They're just going to get their guns illegally because, I mean, if you have a criminal record, it's impossible to get a license, even if you have people who won't vouch for you, you're not going to get a license. So the only way to be a criminal and to legally own a gun is to get your gun license and then become a criminal and never get caught. Because if you ever get arrested, they will take away your license and they will take away your guns. So um, at least that's what the law says. So that is that. Good news for Alberta. Good news for Saskatchewan. We need to go full tilt against the government on this stupid gun ban. And the best way to do that is to share information that is pushing back against it. Again, follow the CCFR, follow anybody on social media, on all the social media platforms, spread the information. That's the best way to counteract the lies and stuff of the mainstream media on the government. And that is why they win. That is why they continually win, is that they have a near monopoly and not enough. I don't think there's none, but there's not enough pushback against their BS because not enough people are following and spreading the information. And at the best too, like donate to people in some of these groups that are fighting back. Donate to some of the people on social media that are fighting back, because that is the way to win. So the last thing I wanted to bring up here is opposition to the liberal gun grab is growing, and that includes from law enforcement at every level, something the Liberals didn't take into account. Now, again, cops are overwhelmingly against this ban. Overwhelmingly. I've yet to see one cop uh, who's posted anything or talked to that said, yeah, this is going to have a significant impact on crime. And it's for the simple reason that cops know that the overwhelming majority of guns used in crimes are ones that were already illegal to begin with. Already illegal to begin with, which means this is going to have no effect whatsoever. Every cop will tell you that the way to reduce crime is to, number one, crack down at the border, crack down on people who are using guns illegally. Because the problem is that most of these people who use guns illegally, they get off with a slap on the wrist, and the problem is that it's largely in these liberal cities, Vancouver's, Toronto's of the world, and that's the problem. Like, that is the big problem, that they get off with a slap on the wrist. They're out in two or three. Like, this is literally something that's back where my some of my family lives. That they're the rural crime problem in Alberta, at least especially in parts of Alberta, is getting pretty bad. And they had a I don't know if you want to call it like a town hall or something like that, where the cops came and talk to people about what they're doing to try and deal with it, what the people can do to deal with it. And they said, well, one of the things they said is that the people that are committing this kind of stuff, because a lot of them they know who they are. Um, they're people that, yeah, they steal. Some of them even have guns. Do armed robberies, stuff like that. They're involved in the drug trade, and they get arrested. They go to jail for a couple of months, and they're right back out, and they back committing crime. They go to jail, they're back out. And the problem is that we need to stop the revolving door system, that we need to crack down on people using guns illegally. And the other thing, too, is that we need to stop treating all these people like victims, too. That's the problem, too, with the criminals is the victim mentality, and that, oh, you're only a criminal because you're native and you're oppressed, or you're black and you're oppressed. That's the only reason why. No, the reality is that the government does a terrible job of helping these people, and the government shouldn't be the ones trying to do the job because they have no incentive to do the job in the first place. I mean, like I mentioned in other videos too, like blacks in the States have been voting Democrat overwhelmingly for 50, 60 years now. And has it helped? Has it helped? Like, I mean, no, because I mean, if they were, why are they all rioting right now? So that's the problem when it comes to the crime, that if you want to know how to reduce crime, we need to stop with the victim mentality. We need to be honest about the differences between the races, because they're not all exactly the same. And we need to be honest about what causes crime in the first place. It's not poverty. People think poverty causes crime. No, crime causes poverty. Because if poverty causes crime, then why do poor white people commit crime at a much lower rate than poor blacks and poor natives? Why do poor Asians commit crime at a much lower rate than poor blacks and even whites and natives? Then why is that the case? So poverty does not cause crime, because if it did, then you would be able to take white people earning, $20,000 a year or less, and they would be committing crime at the same level as other races, and that's not the case. So there's other things that are causing this, and the problem is that people don't want to acknowledge that there's differences between the races, because then they get called racist. And the problem is that the cycle just continues to go back and forth, and it keeps getting worse because nobody wants to admit and deal with the actual problem. Problems don't get better by ignoring what's causing the problem in the first place. That is a classic example, is that if you ignore what's causing problems in the first place, problems don't get better. So that's the kind of a tangent that I just wanted to bring up as far as gun control and crime and all that kind of stuff goes. But there's obviously a lot more to it. I don't want to. I'd have to make the video like 30 minutes long to get into a full diatribe and full reasoning behind what I've said. But uh, in a nutshell, if you want to reduce crime, you need to target people that are committing the crime. And the other problem with that too is that inevitably you're going to have a higher number of minorities that are being arrested. And the problem with that is that people are going to say, "Oh, racism, racism," even though the reality is that they're just more likely to commit crime. Uh, for it to be racist, they would have to be not just disproportionately being arrested; they would have to be disproportionately being arrested based off the amount of crime they commit. Because if race A commits crime at a rate of double the rate of race B, and race A is being arrested twice as much, it's not because of racism, it's because they commit more crime. And that's the problem now, is that we have minorities that are just flat out more likely to commit crime in the first place, and they get arrested more and they're in jail more, and people say, see, this is racism. It's a perfect example of racism, even though the reality is that that's not true. Now, is there some racism? Absolutely. But in a nutshell, that's not the main reasons. So anyway, if you like the video, make sure to hit that like and subscribe. Check out my PayPal and email if you I appreciate any donations, but at the very least, just hit that like and subscribe. Last couple things, check me out on Twitter and check me out on BitChute. All the links are in the description, so you can find them all there.